tutorial starts with a song, but it's only a few seconds long. Let's get started with animation. Hello folks, I want to show you something which is basically not possible, at least not the way you look at it. We have a skeleton on the very left side and a ball. And the skeleton kicks that ball, and the ball falls according to gravity on that floor. Why is it strange? Well, because the skeleton cannot participate in a dynamic simulation. And of course you can animate that ball with keyframes, but it won't be that realistic, and it's amazingly realistic here. So the skeleton is no geometry, that's why it cannot be used in a rigid body simulation, and it's about rigid bodies here. So the trick is something which is very often used in character animation and in animation in general, and the trick is that we show and hide certain things, and in this case I hid something, and I show you what I hid in a new scene. As always, we start a new scene. In a new scene, I want to see the grid. I change the dimensions. Currently this is 1 centimeter, and I go to Windows and the settings, preferences, and here I find the settings, and I change the working units from centimeters to meters. This is not crucial, but and the scene looks basically the same, but it behaves much more nicely when you introduce a character now. That's the next thing we're going to do. We go to Windows, and under Windows we find the content browser. This is Maya 2022, and in previous versions you find the content browser under general editors somewhere there. So go looking for it, the content browser. In the content browser you have animation. Under animation you have the folder motion capture, and under motion capture you have the folder FBX. This is a straightforward way to get FBX files. And what we'll do is we'll introduce a character which is pointing. This one. It's a different character from the one you've seen before. So he or she is in the scene about 2 meters high, because this is 1 meter now and not a centimeter. And what he does when we run the animation, it's not a simulation, it's a motion capture animation. He just stands there and he points into some direction, and we use his pointing for actually animating. He punches a ball, and the ball can be any geometry. It needs to be geometry, NURBS or polygons, and I move it up somewhere there in space. Obviously you can start your animation somewhere else with the ball, but I start here, just about here. I go a little bit back to the point where he actually pushes his hand forward. Around here, this is frame 57 for me. Now I move the ball back, and over here, this looks like the perfect direction for that ball. Okay, this is the starting point. Now, later under FX, I'll make this ball using fields and solvers under legacy rigid bodies, because the legacy rigid bodies are very important. They serve this purpose perfectly here. I will create an active rigid body because I want it to follow gravity, etc. And now I create passive rigid body, at least I prepare a passive rigid body, and this rigid body will be hidden later. So I create this box and move it up and scale it down again, and I move it over here to the wrist of the hand. the wrist is this part, and I can use snapping by pressing and holding the key V and snapping it somewhere there, which is very good. And now I scale it and rotate it so it fits the position of the hand quite nicely, and I make it much thinner and a little bit longer, like this. Now when I run the animation, it doesn't do anything, of course. This is only the preparation. We're at frame 57 in my case, and I want this frame to be the start of the punch. And in order to do that punch, I need to constrain this box to the wrist of the hand, because I want this part to follow the hand all the time. And you can do it in basically two ways. One is by edit parent. You parent it to the wrist. This will not produce a good result. The reason is a little bit complex. For this purpose, you need a really genuine constraint. And the constraints are under animation. And here you find the constraints. The top and most important constraint is called the same as the one I've just shown you, but it works differently. But because it's a real constraint, it's a parent constraint. And in order to use it properly, you need to select the two parts. And I show you the wrong sequence of selection, because it's quite funny. I select the box, and with the Shift key, I select the wrist of the hand, and now I go to Constrain and Parent. What happens? You see the skeleton stretches because I constrained the hand to the box, and I want to constrain it just the other way around. So I undo this, undo Parent Constrained. And I'm at frame 57 again, and now I select the two participants in the constraint in the opposite order, so the wrist first and the box last, and parent constraint. And now the constraint is sitting on the hand. Now I will make this a passive collider, not the hand. Hand cannot be a collider because it cannot participate in dynamic simulations, but the box can. So now I need to go back to FX, and under FX I create a passive rigid body. Passive because it just should be rigid, and we won't care about dynamics and falling to the ground, etc. It just sits there and should be rigid. That's called a passive rigid body. You see this in the attribute editor now. The cube shape has a node here which is called a rigid body. And we create an active rigid body from that sphere. Active rigid body is right here. They're both called legacy rigid bodies because we have the N world now, but the N world is not important here. We use this straightforward way to create an active rigid body. Now, what does the animation look like now? You see, this is perfect. This is the punch, which just works excellent. And now the trick is to hide that object. When we hide it, it looks as if the skeleton was punching the ball. But of course it isn't. This is the trick. Now, if you want the ball to fall to the ground much faster, you need to introduce gravity. So you select the ball, go to Fields and Solvers, and introduce gravity. The animation is slightly different because the ball now falls down before it's actually receiving the punch. How do we fix this? Well, we've decided that frame 57 is the frame to start with. So I select, probably I'm best in the outliner, the polygon sphere, and go to rigid body, and here I right mouse click, set a key for active, and I go one step back, one keyframe, well actually one frame back, and here I untick it and set a keyframe. That means the ball starts in a fixed position and the gravity jumps in at frame 57. Perfect again. And now you see that the ball is falling to the ground very slowly, but it is. And now it's up to you to change things in the gravity. Let me show you where the gravity is. It's here in the outliner. And the gravity has a magnitude of 9.8, which is the standard gravity. And how about changing this to 200? Because we have a different scale here. You see, it behaves differently now. And of course, you can go to other settings for the rigid body. For example, the static friction, the dynamic friction, the bounciness, the damping. If you raise the damping, for example, this happens. And last thing I want to show you is I create a plane, scale it up like this, and move it a little bit over here. And I make this a, what do you guess I'll do? I'll make it a passive rigid body. I don't want to make it fall down when the ball touches it, but since it participates now in the dynamic simulation, the ball falls down and stays there. We need to actually go back to the rigid body and reduce the damping. And try this again in order to see that bounce on the floor. I've showed you in different tutorials how to actually add a character to this skeleton. So you see a real character with texture, etc., who punches that ball. You find the link in the description to one of the tutorials about adding a real character to this skeleton. And in the final rendering, which you see now where the character is kicking the ball, it is the same method. The geometry which you see of the whole character is not participating in the simulation. I have a hidden box at the foot of my character. And with this, I'll leave you for now. Have a very nice day. Bye-bye.
Thank you.